This next panel, sponsored by Meta, will gather different perspectives from private sector leaders on how global tech platforms are facing changes to policy, regulation, and governance. Please welcome Mike Muse and our esteemed panel.
What's happening, New York? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, New York. No good afternoons. Let's try it one more time. Good afternoon, New York. Oh, we love participation. Thank you so much, Sasha, for that. I'm so excited to be in conversation with this incredible, dynamic, brilliant panelist who cannot wait to speak with you. Sasha already warmed you up in terms of what this topic is about. So let's just talk tech and policy. Ladies and gentlemen, I should probably introduce everyone here right now. We have Maryam Mujica, who is the head of public affairs of Americas from Booking.com. Please give it up. Yeah. We have Evelyn Miller right here to my right, vice president of data and privacy at Meta. And Sasha Rubel, head of artificial intelligence, machine learning, public policy of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Amazon Web Services, AWS. Please give it up. As you can tell, I like interaction. So I'm going to start with you, Maryam.
Sure.
I love travel, like as everyone here. I'm sure most of us have used your product. But the question I have for you is the tech industry operates in a rapidly changing landscape with evolving policy and regulation. From your perspective at Bookings.com, what are the most pressing policy and governance challenges that the tech sector faces today? And how is Booking.com navigating these challenges?
Well, I'm excited to be here. And I really love this question in the sense that I think that so much of what we do day to day can make us forget the bigger picture. Yeah. And if I were to think about one macro sort of point to summarize what has happened in the tech sector over the last 10 years, I would say it's the laser focus of regulators looking to regulate what they would consider sort of these intermediary platforms. Some people would call them aggregators. And I'd say even legacy brands also have been calling out those platforms, saying they don't make the things that they're selling. They don't own the things that they sell. And they're just sort of taking our stuff and selling it. Now, turning back to the regulators, a lot of what they want to regulate on there are a variety of issues, but the top of the list are competition, platform liability, consumer protection issues. And so it's really interesting in this dynamic when you think about what these platforms are actually doing, and this is data-driven evidence, that they are actually driving more competition. They're lowering prices for consumers. They're offering more choice and transparency. And also, they're bringing a lot of small independent businesses to a global customer base, but for those platforms, they wouldn't be able to reach those customers. So, just turning it to the audience to think about, imagine, I'm from the travel sector. If Booking.com and Priceline.com, Kayak, and other companies that are online travel companies, imagine if they didn't exist. You would go to 20 different hotel sites, write down the prices, 20 different airline sites, write down the prices, hope that when you go back to the one that you want to get, the price hasn't changed, and basically be doing everything in a highly inefficient and almost, painful way. And so I think that I'm not here to say they shouldn't regulate. What I'm saying is that it's important to bring these consumer benefits and the benefits to small businesses to that conversation. All the good that these platforms are bringing, I think gets forgotten sometimes when regulators are really focused on how to sort of talk about content moderation or competition. It's like, well, actually, they're helping in a lot of these ways to drive more competition, to bring all the information to consumers. So that's just something I think really needs to be more part of the conversation as we think about how to create and how to make thoughtful regulation.
Yeah, Maryam, you're bringing me to Evelyn. When I think about products, I think about uses of small businesses and how they can benefit from that. Meta has a suite of products that a lot of times small businesses can be of use for. So the questions I have with you, Evelyn, because you work with data and privacy. At Meta, you run a policy team that focuses on regulation of some of the most important, contentious, and challenging policy questions around global technology issues, namely privacy, data rights, consent, youth, AI, and more. What role does a company like Meta have to play in the global policy discussion?
Well, first of all, I thought when you said I'm going to bring it to Evelyn, I was going to get to travel.
Oh.
So it's like, all right, let's do this.
Lucky.
I'm going to go travel. Thank you for having me here and for the question, of course. So I am a VP of Data and Privacy Policy, and I think the idea of policy folks, particularly in big tech, is that we're adversarial. We're sort of challenging all regulation and legislation out there, and I think that's a misconception. Actually, we are, I think, working towards reasonable outcomes. I think the idea is to get to regulation that both protects the interests of consumers and generally supports the benefits of society and opens up innovation. And that's the way that we feel about the work that we do. And so when we enter, I mean, certainly there are moments, adversarial moments that either make it to the headlines or don't, but there are those moments. But for the most part, I think we try to be collaborative and work towards a common goal. Much of what's happening here, even in this fora, which is wonderful. Some of the things that beyond that we really like to get ourselves involved in is to bring those stakeholders together, different folks from different parts of the ecosystem that we're in. For example, civil society, bringing in policymakers and academics. Yeah. And we do this through different types of vehicles, what we call accelerators or even sandboxing tools. We have a program called Open Loop, and in this program, we actually use it to validate certain types of soft laws or even potential regulation. And we work with members of all of these different areas that I've just spoken about, what we call stakeholders in this space, to validate these types of regulations or soft laws and see whether or not they really are in balance good for all the things that we're talking about, which is the consumer, society, and innovation. From those programs, we get all kinds of data and information and evidence that we report out and we provide as guidance to policymakers. And hopefully that kind of information helps in the way that they develop the regulation that they're thinking of. We also have a trust and transparency and control program, which is very similar to that. It also brings in stakeholders, but in this case, they're taking existing regulation and trying to sort out the best way to take that regulation to consumers. In other words, if you're trying to figure out what your consent model would look like based on a regulation that's just come out, how do you partner with different members of the community and the ecosystem, whether it's academics, consumers, even will we even do focus groups on this to see what would be the best experience for our users. So that kind of evidence we also use to help feed into the way that that regulators or policymakers would interpret already existing regulation.
So you're bringing me to the idea of innovation and regulation, and I think what has brought that to the surface is the recent developments, and it hasn't been that recent in terms of those of us working on the inside, but the public use of generative AI. I think that is like the hot topic that everyone is talking about, and so Sasha, I think you can handle this. And so I want to
all of generative AI.
Yeah, you are generative AI right now, but I want to kind of discuss generative AI with you. Being at AWS, AWS plays a prominent role in AI and machine learning. Could you share insights on how the industry is addressing emerging governance mechanisms for generative AI? I do have a follow-up to that too as well, because you can handle it. What are the key considerations for balancing innovation and responsible AI development, to which Evelyn was discussing?
Great questions, Mike. I think right now one of the things that many policymakers and also business leaders are grappling with is how to translate principles for responsible AI into practice. So you talk about principles like accountability, explainability, transparency, fairness, bias mitigation. There's general consensus that these are important principles that need to be taken into account in the ways in which we design and develop and deploy AI solutions. But what does that mean, for example, to an engineer on the back end that's trying to look at how to embed these principles in the ways in which they're developing AI solutions? So at AWS, we're looking at this really from 4 different levels. The first is really helping our customers and startups translate these principles into practice, to say concretely, this is what it means to take on board principles for example, transparency. One of the ways that we're doing that is through our, what we call AI/ML service cards, which helps customers understand what is in the training data, how are these services developed, what is an acceptable use of this service, for example. But part of that also means investing in education. And this is where really the second pillar of our work comes in, is really taking a holistic approach. And here I'd like to emphasize that it's not just about ensuring digital literacy. It's also about ensuring literacy about what it means to develop and deploy AI solutions responsibly, with the understanding that just because it's technologically feasible doesn't mean we should do it. The third piece for us is really about taking a people-centric approach. And I'm thrilled to be on a panel today with 2 other women, because one of the things that we are really committed to is making sure that there's a diversity of perspectives around the table when these solutions are being designed, developed, and deployed. And it's not just about gender equality. It's also about diversity in backgrounds. I'm an anthropologist. I'm working every day with lawyers and engineers. And that diversity really brings an added value to the work that we're doing in AI solutions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please.
No.
The fourth pillar that I would just close on this is really looking at science and investing in research. There are a lot of questions that are coming up around generative AI. And we see this new issues around misinformation and disinformation. I live in Paris. That is the front of mind for policymakers everywhere. What is the future of disinformation and misinformation in the era of generative AI? And so a lot of the work that we do is investing in research here. And I'd just like to flag, Mike, because I like the way you articulated it in terms of responsibility and innovation. One of the things that we are absolutely convinced of is that developing and deploying AI solutions responsibly drives trust. And trust is the biggest barrier to adoption for AI. And that trust drives innovation, and that innovation drives business adoption. So there isn't a dichotomy between responsibility and innovation. I would say the only way to innovate in the long term is responsibly.
I love that, because I love how you brought in interdisciplinary teams. I talk about that often. And I think that unto itself is innovation in terms of how teams are developed. For far too often, we focus just on computer science, but we actually do need philosophy majors, sociology majors, right? To think about human conditions, human patterns, migration patterns, right? Like develop a very much cohesive team to create better products, right? And with that, I want to lighten the mood a little bit. And I'm coming to you, Maryam, and not that the question will be light, but it's the idea of travel. And I'm picking up where I left off with generative AI, because a lot of people now are using generative AI as a tool as they begin to think about their travel plans. And so I'm just curious with you, Maryam, how do you see AI impacting the travel industry? And on a policy as well as tech organization level, what steps do you believe are essential to adapt to such changes effectively?
Well, it's first of all, we all know, hopefully, that AI has been around for a while, but it was not quite a year ago that generative AI burst into the public consciousness in a manner that few new technologies ever have before. You know, people talk about the only other thing they can compare it to is the dawn of the internet, which I would agree, it's that monumental. And so it's exciting because a lot of people are talking about it conceptually, but in the travel industry, we're really deploying it in a way that is sort of a pragmatic way that is going to affect the way that you travel and you experience travel. So I'll give it to you, the best way to put it is an example. Imagine a human travel agent. But I'm not talking about any human travel agent, like the best human travel agent. Never stops working for you, never gets distracted, knows exactly what you want, knows exactly what you don't like, and has an incredible source, endless sources of information to pull from to provide you with the choices that you need to make your travel plans. Now, replace the word human with digital. And a digital agent is really where we're moving towards, where, again, taking that example a step further, you're on your flight next year to come back to Concordia, and your flight to New York, if you don't live here, is delayed, and you had a reservation at a restaurant next to your hotel. And so the digital travel agent is going to know that you're not going to make that reservation. They're going to try to rebook you at a later time at that same restaurant, but they're going to realize, oh no, there's no availability. They're going to know another restaurant nearby your hotel that actually will be another place you'll be thrilled to try. And then they'll inform your hotel that you're running late. They will make the reservation exactly at the time they know it will take you to land, either clear customs or get your bags, or not, because they'll know if you checked your bag, and drop it off at the hotel and get to your restaurant. So a lot of the frustrations that we experience in travel will be more seamless, and it will be addressed through AI. Now, we're not there yet, but we are hopefully in that first iteration of getting there. Yeah. So at Booking.com, we have the AI trip planner tool that is powered by ChatGPT. At Kayak, they've also integrated ChatGPT. At Booking, it actually is at the beginning of the funnel when you start your discovery of what you were looking for. And at Priceline, we have a product called Penny, where it's at the checkout, where if you forgot to look into if the hotel can take dogs, you can say, hey, does it allow dogs? And my dog is a big dog, and different things that you want to ask before checking out. So the possibilities are endless. Mm-hmm. And I think going back to that issue that I brought up before, consumer benefit, helping small businesses, and then with a lot of the other themes that we're all talking about today, responsibility and all the other important parts of building these tools in a responsible way with trust is sort of how you get there. But
I mean, you really talked about this broad scope of things, and that all sounds amazing, and the possibilities are endless, which is why I love technology, which is why I love AI. But Evelyn, let's face it, these are complicated issues. These are hard issues, particularly when it comes to data, when it comes to privacy, when it comes to regulation. And at Meta, you are constantly reconciling innovation, difficult task, imagining what is possible. But how do you translate these technical issues for policymakers and other stakeholders?
Well, first, I feel so fortunate to be a part of a company that is really on the bleeding edge in terms of technology. We've been talking about generative AI, and it's been something that obviously our company has been very involved in, having just launched a large language model, generative AI tool, recently. So I can say that it is one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. It does come with a heavy weight of explaining the technical elements of such interesting, quickly developing and powerful technology. But I think the way that our company and as policy folks, we do this is really to look to the issue of trust, right, and transparency, and try to make that possible for the consumer. And in this case, when we launch something like Llama 2.0, it would be developers that are going to be using this model. Part of that is bundling up the resources to be able to use Llama 2 well. What we did when we launched Llama 2 was to launch a microsite, responsibility microsite. And in that microsite, you could find a research paper that had all the technical elements of Llama 2.0. That helps, of course, to understand exactly how it's built, giving you the transparency that you need. We also give opportunity that prompts engineers to know when mitigations are necessary through a user guide that in every stage of development, they'd be able to look to find where they can mitigate for risk. And finally, we have the acceptable use guide, which tells you basically when and when not to use it, when it's not appropriate, to address the really big concerns I think most of us would have about using AI in ways that are not suitable. So those are some of the ways that we try to make clear that the sort of the technical side of the technology that we deliver.
All right, so that's the technical side. So now I'm going to come to you, Sasha, and as our closer. We only have a few moments remaining, but I believe you can handle this because you inferred in this conversation, diversity. And so as I'm thinking about, your role, public policy in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, the regulatory landscape is always changing. And for whatever reason, we always talk about Europe and beyond, but I'm curious about the global South, right? And how do you guys collaborate with policymakers and industry stakeholders to shape and influence tech policy that aligns with both innovation and responsible AI development?
Great question. I'll refer back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of diversity of perspectives. And one of the things that we are absolutely committed to is making sure that everybody has a seat at the table in shaping policies that are intended to make the end users' lives better. So those users and those innovators need to be around the table in order to make sure, A, that the policy is technically feasible, and it's one of the things that we're addressing right now, for example, with the EU AI Act, to say, what does it mean for a use case to be risky? What makes it risky? How should that be interoperably defined? What is the role of organizations like NIST or the OECD in working together with the private sector, with civil society, with academics, and with government decision makers to define that, to promote innovation? But part of that also means making sure that individuals and communities that are otherwise oftentimes left out of these conversations have a seat at the table. I just want to share a use case, which is actually one of the use cases that made me join AWS from the public sector, which is we are working with communities in sub-Saharan Africa to use biometric identification to provide access to banking services in communities that otherwise wouldn't have access to these services, because in these communities, many people do not have national IDs. And so when you're thinking about regulating, for example, biometric identification, you also need to be thinking about the ways in which this technology is being deployed in life-saving and transformative ways on the ground. So the people who are impacted by these policies need to be part of the table. And I would close just by saying that the Global South are not only impacted by these policies, they are also oftentimes paving the way. So there are startup acts that have been developed through participatory public policy processes and deliberative democracy initiatives in Senegal, in Rwanda, in Ghana, in Nigeria, that are really bringing to the table the stakeholders that are oftentimes leapfrogging in terms of innovation and technology. A lot of the most extraordinary fintech innovations were born out of Eastern Africa and were then integrated in Europe and the United States. And so learning from those experiences, what is the necessary framework, regulatory and otherwise, in order to encourage that innovation and in order to make sure that these regulatory frameworks are multi-stakeholder shaped. That's what makes these technologies and these regulatory frameworks future-proof. It's what makes them technically feasible, and it's what makes them trustworthy and promote innovation.
What a dynamic conversation. Audience, please give it up for Sasha, Maryam, and Evelyn. Thank you so much, panelists. You guys were fantastic.